The late summer sun beat down like a spotlight as my wife trimmed the roses by the front porch, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the low buzz of cicadas. Our lakefront neighborhood shimmered with deceptive peace, the manicured lawns, the matching mailboxes, the American flags flapping in synchronized rhythm. It looked like paradise. But trouble doesn't always come with flashing lights or warning sirens. Sometimes it shows up wearing oversized sunglasses, clutching a clipboard, and marching down the sidewalk like it owns the earth beneath it. That's exactly how Karen arrived. Lipstick too red, eyes too judgmental, and nose so high it could catch clouds. Her walk had purpose, her smile was tight as a rusted bolt, and I swear the birds stopped chirping as she passed by. My son had just finished unloading the last of his boxes into our guest house when she spotted him. He was wearing a simple gray hoodie, jeans, and a ball cap, hardly the image of a criminal. But Karen's eyes locked on him like a hawk on prey. It didn't matter that he was mine, that he had a legal address, that his name was on the deed. To her, he was a disruption. A question mark. An unknown in a community where she expected everything to be tightly controlled and predictably dull. You ever feel the tension crackle before the storm hits? That was the air between us as I greeted her, towel in hand, sweat on my brow. She didn't bother with small talk. No, hi, how are you? No neighborly smile. Just a clipped, is he staying here permanently? Her eyes didn't leave my son, who was now heading toward the lake with his fishing rod. I blinked. Was this real life? Did she think she had the right to interrogate me about who was living in my own home? Before I could answer, she added, "You should know this neighborhood has very strict rules about long-term guests." Her words were sharp, polished like glass, meant to cut without showing blood. I laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. This was the same Karen who'd once tried to fine another neighbor for having wind chimes that disrupted the HOA's aesthetic, the same one who called in a noise complaint over a kid's birthday party. And now she had locked onto my son like he was her new project. But this time she picked the wrong family. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly guess, was that my wife wasn't just another friendly suburban gardener. Beneath that wide-brimmed hat and calm demeanor was a steel core forged in chaos. My wife had served 22 years in the military, 12 of them in covert operations so classified she couldn't even tell me the full story. She retired with distinction, medals tucked away in drawers, her name whispered in briefing rooms. And while she never boasted, never wore her rank like a badge, there was something unmistakably commanding about her presence when she chose to reveal it. So when Karen spun on her heel and stomped off, muttering about calling the HO president, I just smiled and went back to watering the petunias. I'd seen storms like her before. Blustery, loud, full of lightning, but they always passed. Or so I thought. What I didn't expect was that 20 minutes later, I'd be staring at two sheriff's deputies walking up my driveway, their boots crunching against the gravel. One tall and broad-shouldered, the other young and twitchy, hands hovering near his belt. Karen followed close behind, arms crossed and face smug as sin. "Sir," the older deputy began, voice neutral, "we got a call about a possible trespasser on the property?" I looked past him to Karen, who stood with the self-righteous energy of someone who had just delivered justice. I opened my mouth to respond, but I didn't need to. From the side yard came the sound of a screen door creaking open, then a calm, clear voice that froze everyone in their tracks. "Is there a problem, deputy?" The older cop turned, and instantly his posture shifted. His eyes widened, his lips parted slightly. Then, in a motion so swift it stunned Karen into silence, he snapped into a full salute. "Ma'am?" Karen's jaw dropped. I swear if she had been holding her sunglasses, she'd have crushed them in her hand. My wife walked toward them, her gloved hands still dusty with soil, her gaze steady, calm, and commanding. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just another HOA spat. This was the beginning of something bigger, something absurd, intense, and wildly satisfying. And Karen? She had no idea the fire she just lit. To understand how this whole thing spiraled into a full-blown HOA showdown, you need to know a little more about us, and about Karen. My name's Jack. I'm a retired firefighter with a bad back, a love for fishing, and a tendency to underestimate how petty people can be when given just a sliver of power. My wife, Evelyn, is the quiet force that holds everything together. If I'm the flame, she's the steel that contains it. 22 years in military intelligence taught her patience, precision, and the art of saying more with a glance than most people can manage in a 5-minute rant. She's tough as nails and warm as fresh bread, depending on whether you're friend or foe. We moved to this lakeside community 3 years ago to escape the noise of the city and spend our days kayaking, gardening, and sipping iced tea on the porch. It's the kind of neighborhood where golf carts outnumber bicycles, retirees swap homemade pies, and everyone's lawn looks like it's maintained by a professional groundskeeper. That's because of the HOA, the Homeowners Association, which might as well be the Vatican of petty regulations. Trash bins visible for more than 17 minutes after pickup? That's a warning. Garden gnome visible from the sidewalk? That's a fine. American flag slightly faded? That's a letter in the mail and a passive-aggressive post on the community bulletin board. Enter Karen. Her real name is Linda, but calling her that feels dishonest to the spirit of her presence. Karen is the self-appointed enforcer of all things HOA, even though she technically holds only one official position: Vice Chair of the Architectural Review Committee. That role, in theory, involves reviewing exterior home changes. In practice, it's her license to scrutinize every inch of the neighborhood like a hawk with a clipboard. She walks her little white poodle, Muffin, 4 times a day, though I suspect it's less about Muffin's bladder and more about inspecting trash placement and fence line deviations. She's the kind of person who uses the word unsightly more often than hello, and who once recommended we not leave our porch light on past midnight because light pollution affects the aesthetic. You can't make this stuff up. As for my son, Caleb, he'd just come home after completing a difficult rehab and therapy program. A few years ago, he got hit by a drunk driver while helping a stranded woman change a tire on the highway. Crushed ribs, shattered leg, brain trauma. It took him nearly a year to relearn how to walk and speak properly again. But he did it. And when he asked to stay with us for a while, maybe help out around the house, get back to nature, heal at his own pace, I didn't hesitate. The guest house in the backyard had sat empty for months. It had a bathroom, kitchenette, separate entrance. It was perfect for him. But to Karen, he wasn't a son returning home. He was a threat to the order she so tightly clutched. A male figure she didn't recognize. He didn't smile at her the way our elderly neighbors did. He didn't make small talk about azaleas or HOA fundraisers. He kept to himself, went jogging early, sat by the lake in the evening with a sketch pad, and didn't wave when Karen passed by. That was all it took. In her mind, Caleb became a mystery, and mystery to her was unacceptable. The thing is, Caleb's not just recovering physically, he's carrying invisible weight. PTSD, anxiety, guilt. He's kind, respectful, and quiet. But Karen didn't ask about that. She didn't knock on our door to get to know him. She saw something that didn't fit her mold and went straight to the rulebook. When she approached me that day questioning who he was, I tried to stay calm. I explained it simply: my son was staying with us temporarily, and yes, he was using the guest house. Her mouth tightened into a line so sharp it could have split a lemon. Guests, she sniffed, must not stay longer than 14 consecutive days without written HOA approval. Section 5.2b. She said it like scripture. I told her he wasn't a guest. He was family. But she wasn't hearing it. From that moment it was clear, Karen had marked us. Not because we'd broken any real rule, but because we had defied her control. And in her world, control was everything. She began watching us more closely. She noted how often Caleb came and went. She asked another neighbor if he was registered with the county. I heard from a friend down the street that Karen had made comments about people sneaking in family under the radar. My blood boiled, but I kept cool. Because I knew something Karen didn't. You see, we had paperwork. We had rights. And most of all, we had patience. Evelyn had faced warlords and terrorists. Karen wasn't even in the same league. It started with a letter, plain white envelope, HOA letterhead, slipped into our mailbox like a snake coiled in paper. Notice of violation. It read in bold, joyless font. I still remember the moment I opened it. I had just finished my morning coffee and stepped outside to grab the mail. The sun was soft, a breeze rustled through the oaks, and birds chirped like they were composing a symphony. I was thinking about taking Caleb out on the boat later, maybe casting lines in silence like we used to when he was little. Then I saw the envelope and the good mood cracked like a dropped plate. I stood on the porch as I read it. According to the letter, we were in violation of the HOA's residential guest policy. Ongoing occupancy by non-homeowners may be subject to fines and potential legal action, it warned. It referenced Section 5.2b, just like Karen had parroted, and demanded that we submit an occupancy justification form for Caleb's stay, including proof of his intent to vacate. Proof. Like my son was some kind of criminal or squatter. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands were trembling, not from fear but from something deeper. Rage wrapped in disbelief. I brought the letter inside and set it on the kitchen counter like it was contaminated. Evelyn looked up from her gardening gloves, her brow raised in quiet curiosity. "Another coupon packet?" she asked. I slid it to her. She read it once, slowly, then let out a sigh so controlled it scared me more than if she'd screamed. "She's not going to stop," she murmured. "She's testing us." I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. I really did. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I emailed the HOA president, Mark Tillman, a man with the spine of a breadstick and a voice like a dying leaf blower. I laid it out clearly and respectfully. Caleb was our son. He was staying in the guest house. He was not causing disruption, damage, or disorder. We were not in violation of anything. We weren't renting the space out or hiding strangers. We were providing recovery and care for our own child. I waited a day. No reply. 2 days. Still nothing. Then came the second letter. This one wasn't even pretending to be cordial. It said we had 10 days to remedy the unauthorized guest situation, or face fines of $250 per day. I blinked at the paper, rereading the absurd phrase, unauthorized guest. I didn't know whether to laugh or punch something. Caleb had risked his life for a stranger on the highway. He'd given more in that moment than Karen would in her entire HOA crusade. And now he was being treated like an intruder in his own family's home. That night I told Caleb about the letter. He looked down, ashamed, not angry, not indignant. Just quietly defeated. "I don't want to cause problems," he said softly. "Maybe I should just go stay somewhere else." That broke me. "No, son," I told him. "You're not going anywhere." I walked out to the porch, sat down next to Evelyn and stared out across the lake. The moon reflected off the water like a blade. "She's turning this into a war," I said. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Then she better be ready for who she picked it with." The next morning I tried one more time. I called Mark directly. He answered, sounding flustered. When I asked about the letters, he stammered something about routine enforcement and several residents raising concerns. I pressed him, who exactly had complained. He wouldn't say. But we both knew. It was Karen. It was always Karen. I hung up the phone and felt it in my gut. This wasn't about Caleb violating a rule. This was personal. She saw us, our independence, our quiet strength, and it rattled her. We didn't bow, we didn't cower, and most of all, we didn't let her dictate how we lived. The next few days were a blur of quiet resistance. Caleb kept to himself, but I could see the stress weighing on him. Evelyn became more focused, as if preparing for battle, except her battlefield was paperwork and procedure. Karen, meanwhile, made herself ever more visible. Her walks became more frequent, her gaze more invasive. I once saw her peer over our fence with a pair of binoculars, pretending to look at birds. We didn't react. We didn't rise to her bait. But make no mistake, I was seething. This wasn't just about rules anymore. This was about dignity. About family. About standing your ground when someone decides their imagined authority outweighs your humanity. And that was the moment I knew, if the HOA wanted a conflict, they were going to get one. Only they had no idea who they were up against. If I had hoped things would settle down after that second warning, I was wrong. In fact, the next 2 weeks felt like living under surveillance. Every time Caleb stepped outside, whether it was to jog around the lake, grab groceries, or sit under the willow tree with his sketch pad, Karen made sure she was nearby. Sometimes she walked Muffin a fifth time. Other times, she just happened to be watering her flowers, staring at our yard over the top of her hedge like she was manning a guard tower. Evelyn called it neighborhood theater. I called it harassment. Then came the third letter. This one was typed in bold font, with phrases like final notice and imminent fines. It demanded immediate removal of the unauthorized occupant, threatened to notify local authorities if noncompliance continues, and warned that further action could include lien proceedings. Over our son living in our legally owned guest house. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread out before us like a dirty rag, Evelyn on one side, Caleb on the other. My knuckles were white around my coffee mug. "I thought this place was supposed to be peaceful," Caleb muttered. I looked at Evelyn. Her eyes were calm but focused. "They're pushing us," she said. "Seeing how far we'll bend." It wasn't just letters anymore. Karen escalated to full-on HOA inspections. 3 times that week, a member of the HOA board walked our property line with a clipboard. They said they were evaluating landscaping compliance, but I saw them peering through the guesthouse windows, photographing the side yard, even tapping the fence slats like they were testing for contraband. Evelyn followed one of them silently from 15 feet away, arms crossed, saying nothing. The poor man couldn't leave fast enough. We filed complaints with the HOA board about harassment. No response. We attended the next HOA meeting and brought up the issue in public comment. Karen, seated proudly at the head table, rolled her eyes dramatically and loudly whispered something about overreacting homeowners. No one challenged her. Not even Mark, the president, who just looked down at his folded hands like a child scolded at dinner. Meanwhile, anonymous notes began appearing in our mailbox. One said, "Follow the rules or move." Another, "This isn't a halfway house." Caleb saw that one and went silent for 2 days. Evelyn and I tried to shield him, but how do you protect someone from a community turning into a mob? It felt like we were being pushed out of our own home. Not by violence but by 1,000 tiny paper cuts. And then of course came the cops. Karen called the sheriff's office one morning after seeing Caleb unloading groceries from his car. Said there was a suspicious male loitering near her property. When the 2 deputies showed up, Caleb was barefoot on the porch eating watermelon. The same porch he'd sat on since he was a kid. They questioned him, asked for ID, and then asked to speak to the homeowner. Evelyn stepped outside and introduced herself. That's when the deputy recognized her. He straightened immediately, greeted her with a formal "ma'am," and then, without missing a beat, saluted her. His partner, confused, looked between them as Evelyn calmly explained the situation. "That's my son," she said. "He lives in the guest house, which is on our deeded property. There is no loitering. There is no crime." The older deputy nodded and apologized. The younger one mumbled something and tipped his hat. Then they left. Karen, watching from her driveway, turned the color of skim milk left too long in the sun. But she still wouldn't stop. The very next morning we got another letter. This one said we had been reported for operating an unpermitted second dwelling. They were now threatening legal escalation. Evelyn looked up from the page, her face unreadable. "So this is the playbook," she said. "They'll just keep digging until they find a crack." It was at that point I nearly snapped. I considered lawyering up, calling local media, or marching into the HOA office and flipping a table. But Evelyn held me back. "Let them keep pushing," she said. "They're leaving footprints. We just need to catch them in the act." That night we set up cameras. Not just outside but around the perimeter, pointing toward the public sidewalks, the fence line, the driveway. Not for revenge, just for protection. Caleb helped set them up, his hands steady despite everything. "Feels like we're building a fort," he joked. I smiled weakly, but I could see the weight in his eyes. This wasn't just about housing anymore. It was about being seen. Being safe. Being allowed to exist without apology. The cameras caught Karen peeking over the fence 2 days later. Then one of her HOA cronies came by at night with a flashlight. Evelyn calmly cataloged everything, time-stamped the footage, and started assembling a file. Because we weren't just fighting back anymore. We were preparing to end it. The turning point wasn't some dramatic showdown or slam of a gavel. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that slips by unnoticed by the world. Evelyn and I were sitting in the sunroom, soft jazz humming from the record player, when she looked up from her laptop and said, "They made a mistake." That's all. Just 4 words. But the steel in her voice made my heart thump like a war drum. She rotated the screen toward me. "Karen and the HOA have been citing Section 5.2b in every letter," she said. "But that policy was revised 2 years ago during the county-wide zoning update. Guess who forgot to update their HOA charter?" I leaned in, and there it was, plain as day, a conflict between the current municipal residential code and the outdated HOA rulebook. Our county's regulations had adjusted their definitions of guest and dwelling use to accommodate veterans, elderly family care, and post-recovery housing. In short, Caleb was protected. He didn't count as a guest under the law. We didn't need HOA approval to let our adult son live in our fully permitted guest house. The law had our back. "Let me guess," I muttered, already smiling. "Karen never bothered to read past the rules she memorized 10 years ago." Evelyn nodded. "Not only that, she's been enforcing a policy that's no longer legally valid. And she's documented it. In writing." That was our aha moment. 4 weeks, we'd played defense, responding to letters, documenting harassment, calming Caleb's frayed nerves. But now, we had leverage. A trap they'd walked right into over and over with their smug little notices and bogus threats. Evelyn went into full mission mode. She organized our file. Every letter, every time-stamped video, every screenshot of Karen's little surveillance strolls. She printed out the updated county code, highlighted the relevant lines, and stapled it next to the HOA's outdated charter. She included a copy of our guesthouse permit, Caleb's hospital discharge records, and, this was her idea, a character reference from our retired neighbor who happened to be a decorated former judge. It was a masterclass in precision. I'd seen her put together briefings in war zones less organized than this. But we weren't stopping at a letter this time. We scheduled a meeting with a local attorney who specialized in HOA abuse. He was a soft-spoken man with a thick mustache and a surprisingly deep hatred for what he called suburban tyrants with clipboards. He read our file, whistled low, and said, "You've got them. Hard." He offered to write a cease and desist letter free of charge, said he hated bullies, and this case had the smell of a small-town power trip gone sour. Then came the cherry on top. We decided to bring the battle public. Evelyn and I attended the next HOA meeting, but this time we brought allies. Over the weeks, we had quietly spoken to several neighbors, some of whom had also suffered Karen's nitpicking, some who'd received similar warnings for silly things like potted plants or sidewalk chalk. People were afraid, sure. But they were also tired. Tired of being treated like tenants in their own homes. When we told them what we found in the county code, jaws dropped. So when we walked into that meeting, we didn't come alone. Nearly 24 residents joined us. Some stood. Some sat in the back. But they were there, and that meant everything. Mark, the HOA president, looked uncomfortable from the start. Karen sat at the head of the table in her usual cream cardigan and oversized sunglasses, radiating fake calm. During the open comments section, Evelyn stood up. "Come, boys," holding the folder like it was a nuclear launch code. "I'd like to formally submit a legal concern," she said. She laid out the facts, no shouting, no accusations. Just facts. Her voice was quiet, commanding. She read the conflicting laws, cited the county code, referenced legal precedent, and finally handed over a copy of our attorney's letter. Karen's smile froze. She whispered something to Mark, who turned pale. Someone behind us let out a low whistle. Evelyn finished with, "This HOA has not only acted outside of its authority but has actively harassed my family, my disabled son, and violated privacy laws in the process. I am prepared to file a formal complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board, and if necessary pursue civil litigation." Silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. Within seconds the whole room broke into applause. Karen shrank in her chair like she'd suddenly realized her throne was made of tissue paper. That was the moment the tide turned. Because finally they knew, we weren't just another family to push around. We were the family who pushed back. And we had receipts. It was almost poetic how quickly the fear changed sides. The very next morning after the HOA meeting, a formal email from the board hit my inbox. Subject line, "Occupancy clarification." Gone were the aggressive warnings, the bold font threats, the legal posturing. In their place? Soft, sheepish language carefully crafted by someone who'd clearly had a lawyer take a red pen to their usual tone. "After reviewing your submitted documentation and updated county ordinances," it began, "the HOA acknowledges that no violation has occurred. No fine. No threats. No more talk of lien proceedings. Just a forced concession disguised as a polite dismissal." I read the email out loud at breakfast. Caleb looked up from his bowl of oatmeal with a crooked smile. "So, that's it? After all that they just back off?" He seemed bewildered, as if part of him still expected another shoe to drop. Evelyn just chuckled. "Oh, they're not finished being embarrassed. They just don't know it yet." And she was right. That night, I posted a summary of the ordeal on our private neighborhood online forum. I didn't name names. I didn't attack. I just laid out the events. The letters, the police call, the outdated rules, the legal response, and the conclusion. Then I attached a clean PDF of the relevant county code, and ended the post with one simple line. "If the HOA has done this to you, know your rights, and know you're not alone." It exploded. By morning the thread had over 50 comments. Neighbors we hadn't heard from in months were chiming in. Stories poured in, about Karen's petty fines, inspections over hanging plants, threats over birthday balloons, accusations over driveway chalk. One woman had even been warned for letting her niece's car stay parked in front of her house for a weekend. The community, once polite but quiet, was suddenly very loud. The best part? Mark, the spineless HOA president, tried to jump into the thread with a half-hearted attempt to clarify the board's intent. He claimed the enforcement was standard procedure, and that concerns were raised by multiple residents. But the community didn't buy it anymore. One reply after another called out the harassment. And when someone finally asked who had reported Caleb in the first place, the silence said it all. Everyone knew. Karen. The real revenge wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or door-slamming drama. It came in subtle, humiliating waves, each one chipping away at the paper-thin wall of control Karen had built for herself. the neighborhood began to shift. People stopped waving at her during her walks. Someone hung wind chimes again, just one house over. Another neighbor placed a giant gnome in their garden with a sign taped to it that read, "Unauthorized guest, beware." Karen filed a complaint about that one, of course, but no letter came. No inspection followed. The board had lost its bite. And the final cherry on top? A few weeks later, I was out by the lake helping Caleb with the kayak rack when a familiar sheriff's cruiser pulled up. The same older deputy stepped out, Deputy Rollins. He tipped his hat and said, "Just wanted to follow up." Heard things settled down. "They did," I said with a grin. He nodded, then glanced around and lowered his voice slightly. "By the way, just between us, when we ran the HOA's history after that call, we found half a dozen complaints over the last 2 years. Same tones, same patterns, always one name behind them." He didn't say Karen, but he didn't need to. Evelyn came out just then, wiping her hands on a towel, and Rollins straightened again and offered a crisp salute. Karen saw it from her porch. I know because I watched her stop mid-step, eyes wide behind those bug-eye sunglasses. She froze. That was the moment, the one I'll remember forever. The moment when the sheriff saluted my wife, and Karen realized the woman she tried to bulldoze with HOA nonsense was someone her own county law enforcement treated with deference and respect. Someone who commanded honor not because she demanded it but because she earned it. We didn't need to yell. We didn't need to threaten. We didn't even need to lift a finger beyond what was just and fair. We let Karen hang herself with her own rules. Now, when Caleb walks the neighborhood, people wave. When he jogs past Karen's house, she turns and pretends not to see. And Muffin, poor dog, seems to have fewer and fewer reasons to go on walks. Justice didn't come in a courtroom or a fiery speech. It came in the form of quiet dignity. Of a family that stood its ground. Of a son who got to heal in peace. And of a community that finally opened its eyes to the tyrant in pearls. By autumn, the neighborhood felt different. Not completely changed, not perfect, but lighter somehow, as if the oppressive air that used to settle around Karen's every walk had finally lifted. The grass still got cut, the porches still had matching paint, and the American flag still waved dutifully on Saturdays. But people no longer whispered their grievances in hushed tones or lived in fear of Karen's clipboard. The difference wasn't in the rules, it was in the people. We had found our voice. And it all started with a simple fact. Enough was enough. A month after the sheriff's visit, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Evelyn and I didn't even attend, we'd already made our point, but word spread fast. The agenda, apparently, was redefining board conduct and revising enforcement procedures. Translation? They were cleaning house. Mark, the president, resigned due to personal obligations. The treasurer stepped down soon after, and the new interim president? A woman named Dolores, one of the neighbors who had stood beside us at the meeting and once received a fine for planting sunflowers that attracted too many bees. As for Karen, she didn't resign, but she stopped showing up. Her daily walks became sporadic. No more surprise inspections, no more glares over the hedge, no more notes in the mailbox. A few weeks later, her house went up for sale. A modest listing buried quietly among the others. No open house. No goodbye. Just a quiet departure, the way dust disappears in wind. One day she was there, the next gone. And with her went the shadow that had loomed over the neighborhood for far too long. I wish I could say it ended with champagne and celebration, but real victories rarely do. What came afterward was more meaningful, a slow, steady rebuilding of trust among neighbors. We started waving more, talking more, sharing stories, not just nods. And Caleb? He began to shine again. His walks turned into runs. His sketches grew bolder, brighter. He started helping the local rec center with art classes for kids, something he'd been too anxious to do before. Watching him laugh, seeing him finally relax into his skin, was the greatest vindication of all. One crisp Sunday morning, while Evelyn and I were planting tulip bulbs, he came out holding his coffee and said, "I never thought I'd feel at home again. But this feels like peace." Evelyn smiled, dirt on her hands, wind in her hair. "Peace," she said, "isn't something people give you. It's something you built. And you defended it." I think that's what this whole mess taught us. It wasn't about HOA rules or property lines or letters in mailboxes. It was about the simple truth that bullies, no matter how official their title or how sharp their pen, don't get to define the law. Not in a community. Not in a home. And definitely not in a family. We didn't win by yelling louder. We didn't out-threaten or out-maneuver. We won by standing tall, staying calm, and doing what was right. And we weren't alone. The moment we stood up, others followed. Fear has a hard time surviving when the truth walks in the room. Now, when new families move in, they hear the story. Not from us. We're not ones to brag, but from others. They hear about the family who stood up to the HOA, the woman who silenced a room with a folder, the son who came home and helped bring a neighborhood together. And sometimes, when the sheriff's cruiser rolls by and slows near our street, I can't help but wonder if Deputy Rollins is still keeping an eye on things. Just in case. The garden's blooming again. The lake's still, golden in the early morning light. Evelyn's roses are taller than ever. Caleb built a little bench near the water where he sits and sketches, and sometimes neighbors stop to talk. Life isn't dramatic now. It's not fiery or loud. It's just good. And maybe that's the best ending of all.